This right here is the Perigale Prime, the newest rifle in Warframe. And originally, I didn't really want to make a video about it because it's a sniper rifle and, you know, sniper rifles in Warframe are kinda eh. But man, does this thing slap. It is absolutely insane. Not only does it melt big single targets in a split second, you know, what snipers are usually made for, but I also found a build that gives it great group clearing capabilities as well. I mean, just look at it. This is a sniper rifle. So, big shoutouts to all our generous channel members, and let's check out what's going on here. First things first though, let's go over the details of the Perigale and take a look at its features. The Perigale Prime is a sniper rifle, but not necessarily a standard one, because instead of firing one high-powered bullet, the Perigale Prime fires a 4-round burst. The fire rate between the bursts is relatively low, as you would expect from a sniper rifle. However, and keep this one in mind because it's going to become more important later, the fire rate within the burst, you know, the delay between the 4 burst rounds, that is actually very high and the bullets leave the barrel in rapid succession. Now, as per usual with sniper rifles, you can get a headshot combo. You also have 2 different zoom modes for even higher damage. However, one little problem, so to speak, that we have here is, given that we always fire a 4-round burst, it can happen that we actually hurt our own headshot combo if the first bullet of the burst already takes out the enemy, leading the other 3 to completely miss the target and reduce the combo counter again. That's kind of unfortunate, but it's also not really the end of the world. One thing though that is very interesting about the Perigale Prime, and I think this is a much overlooked feature of this gun, has to do with what happens if you actually decide to hipfire it. Now, usually sniper rifles are not to be hipfired, you know, they become so inaccurate that you can't even hit the broadside of a barn. However, with the Perigale, there is an interesting feature in the form that, yes, the spread is crazy, but it is hard-coded to only be a perfectly horizontal spread. As you can also see right here in the background, there is no vertical variety. The bullets only spread out completely horizontally. This is actually very cool because it means if we have enough multi-shot, it kind of sort of becomes a shotgun in a way. And yes, we're gonna talk about that later in the build section too. So much for the base functionality of the weapon. All of this is relatively obvious. One thing though that sets the Perigale, and the Perigale Prime for that matter, apart from all other snipers is its unique trait. This one is ridiculously overpowered. Whenever you manage to take out an enemy with a headshot, or headshot with all 4 bullets of your burst, then you will gain 100% ammo efficiency for 4 seconds. Yes, you heard that right. We have a burst sniper rifle that allows you to never consume ammo. And it's not even a theoretically constructed case, it is super easy to constantly keep this buff up all the time. Like, I've had literally missions where I didn't reload the darn thing a single time. It is crazy. As for the stats, there's really not much to say here, right? It's a sniper rifle, so you have high crit, high damage, status chance is kinda but it does come with innate punch through. And as always, if you could leave a like for the video, that would be amazing because it helps me with the YouTube algorithm to get these guides out to more people. So thank you so much for your support. Before we move into the builds themselves, there is one very important mod that we need to discuss first, and that would be Primed, aka Charged Chamber. Both of these mods are kind of doing the same thing, it's just that 99.9% of us will probably have to do a Charged Chamber because there's no way we're ever gonna get the Primed one. Now, these mods are exclusive for sniper rifles, and what they do is pretty straightforward. They increase the damage of the first bullet in the magazine. This damage increase is multiplicative to base damage, so it's actually really darn strong. The obvious downside though is that it only ever applies to the first bullet. However, looking back at the unique trait of the Perigale, we are now having a weapon that does not consume ammo at all. In other words, the magazine will always be full, aka every bullet fired is the first bullet in the magazine. Or at least that's how it should work in theory. In practice, it's a little bit different. According to the wiki, Primed and Charged Chamber affect the first bullet fired. However, when you are under any form of ammo efficiency buff, whether that be energized munitions or in our case the unique trait of the rifle, In that case, these chamber mods apply to every bullet fired when the magazine is currently missing exactly one bullet. So what that means for us in practice is, these buffs do in fact work on the Perigale, and they do work on every single bullet fired. However, they only do that if the magazine ammo counter shows 15 bullets remaining. If it's 16 or 14 or less, it will not work. This, unfortunately, is a bit of a problem for the Perigale, because in order to trigger the ammo efficiency buff, you need to hit a full 4-round burst of headshots, which would reduce your magazine count down to 12 before you actually get the ammo efficiency buff. So yeah, that doesn't really work then. If you wanted to, you could circumvent this by infusing energized munitions as well. This one will give you 75% ammo efficiency, which will make exactly sure that your first 4-round burst will only exactly consume 1 ammo, and from that point on, you can then really benefit from the Prime Chamber buff with the 15 rounds remaining in the magazine. However, unfortunately, there's even more inconsistency here, because as we remember, you don't only trigger the unique trait of the weapon by nailing 4 consecutive headshots, but if you manage to take out an enemy with a headshot, then you will instantly get that bonus as well. So if you go for the energized munition strategy, and you actually take out the enemy with the first burst, then what happens is you're going to be stuck at a full 16 rounds in your magazine, which then again will prevent Prime Chamber from working. So yeah, as you can see, it is pretty weird and inconsistent. Yes, these chamber mods are very strong on the Perigale. However, you need to make sure to either run energized munitions and hit all 4 headshots in the burst without killing an enemy to reduce your ammo count to 15, or you do it without energized munitions, but then you gotta make sure that the first bullet of your burst is already a headshot kill to also lock your ammo in at exactly 15. I say, if you want to go for that, it is viable. For my personal liking though, it's too inconsistent and too finicky, so I rather opted to not use them. But okay, now that we have all the secret information on the good thing, let's finally talk about the builds. And in this video, I have 2 different use cases that I want to explain and show builds for. The first one would be the traditional use case of a sniper rifle, taking out strong high-value targets and boss enemies, and the second one would be a sort of unintentional way to use the Perigale, not really as a sniper rifle, but more as a room-nuking shotgun. It's incredibly fun, and you don't want to miss this. But first of all, let's talk about the boss killer use. See, the reason why many boss enemies in Warframe take so long to beat is damage attenuation. This is a mechanic present on specific boss enemies that have a large health bar, like Archons, like the Perigale Rebellion bosses, and so on and so forth. This damage attenuation makes it that the boss enemy will have a unique form of damage reduction against your damage output that is based on the DPS that you're dealing. So what happens is, the game calculates how much DPS you're actually dealing with your weapon and gives the boss enemy corresponding damage reduction. Now, to be fair, there are a bunch of weapons in the game that are pretty darn good at circumventing this whole effect. However, in my opinion, the Perigale Prime is uniquely equipped to do this especially well. Here's why. First of all, this right here is the formula with which the damage attenuation calculates how much DPS you're dealing to set the enemy resistance correspondingly. And as you can clearly see here, this formula includes your fire rate. The higher your fire rate, the higher your DPS, the more resistance the enemy gets. Now, remember what I said at the beginning of the video? The fire rate within the burst of the Perigale Prime is actually really darn high. However, taking a look at the weapon stats, then we see that the fire rate is actually very low, because what the fire rate figure measures is how fast we can fire individual bursts. What this means for damage attenuation is, the formula will calculate with a very low fire rate, when in reality, we are firing very rapidly, dealing much more DPS than the stats themselves would reveal. This is the first way in which the Perigale kinda sorta outsmarts damage attenuation. However, there's a second and arguably more important part to it. And that is that damage attenuation usually takes round about a second or so to fully kick in. What this means is, if you have very front-loaded damage, then you can score very big hits before the enemy even gets their full resistance to your damage. And also here, what could be more front-loaded than a frickin' sniper rifle with a rapid-fire burst? No matter which type of boss you're going against, the Perigale Prime is gonna make ridiculously short work out of all these elite enemies. And just in case you want to use it this way, then let's also take a look at the builds now. This right here would be one baseline for a boss fighting build. We're going to talk about a couple of variations here, so don't just carbon copy it. The most important part here would be the primary acuity. This is ridiculously strong against bosses because in those fights you primarily aim for the weak spots, and this massively increases crit and damage against the weak spots. One thing that is important to note here though, the weak point damage that this mod talks about, that's not actually damage, that is weak point multiplier. This is also why in the arcane slot we go with primary deadhead, because primary deadhead 2 gives you plus 30% headshot multiplier, and the fun fact is that this headshot multiplier and this 350% headshot multiplier, that stacks multiplicatively with one another, therefore making this combination very strong. However though, if you are in a sort of boss fight where it's difficult to stack up primary deadhead, then alternatively what you could also do is primary bulwark. This one is very great because it gives you up to 500% base damage and it only requires your Warframe to have certain amounts of armor. This is the perfect solution for boss fights where you can't stack up your arcanes. As for the rest of the build, for our crit, we're gonna go with Galvanized Scope, which is a perfect synergy with primary acuity as well, because here acuity wants us to hit the weak point, and Galvanized Scope is also gonna give us crazy crit chance if we hit the weak point. It should be said though that also here, if you can't stack up the weak point kills in the substat, then you could alternatively go with something like Critical Delay here, which will give you 200% crit chance at the cost of a little bit of fire rate, but that's, I think, a sacrifice worth making. The crit damage comes from Vital Sense, of course, but if you wanted to, you could even add in Hammer Shot. That is a viable option here too. Then, for those boss builds, you of course want to zoom in to capitalize on the maximum damage possible, which is why we go for Target Acquired that will even further increase our headshot multiplier. And because we're fighting bosses, and because we're usually priming boss enemies, we go with Galvanized Aptitude, which will give us even more direct damage. The rest of the build though would be an element, in my case Corrosive, as well as a faction mod, but these 3 slots here, they're kind of sort of flexible depending on which enemy faction you're up against. If you're, let's say, hunting a Kuvalich, then this here would make sense, Grineer faction damage and Corrosive. But if you're up against Skuldra, then of course you don't use a faction damage mod because you don't have that. And naturally, the elemental combination, you would adjust that to whichever faction you're up against. But yeah, this would be how to use the Perigale Prime against big bosses. Try it out, it is incredibly strong. But in the intro, I promised you that I found a build with which you can actually use this single target sniper rifle to become a sort of room AoE nuke. So how about we now also talk about that? The way we make this work has to do with the fact how the Perigale Prime behaves when fired from the hip. Remember, in the first chapter, we found out that when the Perigale Prime is hip-fired, then yes, just like other sniper rifles, it becomes very inaccurate. However, the bullet spread is always purely horizontal. There is no vertical variety whatsoever. What this now means is, if we have a whole lot of multi-shot, then we're gonna have a pretty decent chance at hitting enemies in a medium range in front of us. Like, sure, most of the bullets are probably not gonna hit, but then again, we're talking about a sniper rifle. As long as one of those stray bullets homes into an enemy weak spot, that's usually enough to take them out right away. We only need to aim at roughly enemy head height, and because the spread is purely horizontal, that means we're nailing a lot of those headshots. However though, to truly unleash the AoE power of this gun, we need to add blast damage. As you probably know, the way blast works is that if an enemy is afflicted by blast and then they die, this will create an AoE explosion that deals blast damage to enemies around them. Now, the status chance is very darn low, that is completely correct. We're not gonna stack blast with the weapon itself. Instead, we're gonna use Side09 as our Warframe synergy and use his ammo packs to infuse blast onto the weapon. First of all, due to the Perigale Prime's ammo efficiency trait, that means we don't need to spam the skill a lot, we just give ourselves ammo once. And on top of that, because the Perigale Prime is considered a sniper rifle, the additional damage from Side09's ammo, remember, sniper rifles get much more added damage from this than other weapon types. Now, here is why this is so ridiculously strong. The additional element added from Side09's ammo is considered a second damage instance, and it will always force proc its element, regardless of the weapon's status chance. This way, the measly 20% status chance of the Perigale don't really matter because we force proc blast with every single hit anyway. And given the fact that our hits are so strong that they basically take out the enemy in one hit, that means that this strong force proc blast will instantly trigger the blast AoE explosion and deal ridiculously high blast damage to enemies around it. As you've probably seen in the background a couple times, we're dealing blast damage in the millions here. All we then need to do is make sure that we have a whole lot of multi-shot so that we hit all the enemies in front of us with our cone of fire. And as you can clearly see in the gameplay scenes, it is absolutely ridiculous. It's not meant to be like this because it's still a single target sniper rifle, but we're just using it as a shotgun anyway, and it works incredibly well. But now, also here, let's take a look at the build. First of all, for Side09 himself, I want to opt for as much maximum energy as possible. Right now I have 905, which is very, very high, and what we're doing here is a lot of blue shards for maximum energy, and also in the build itself we go with Prime Flow. For the rest of the mods, we focus for a lot of ability strength, which will give our snipers a lot of extra damage with the additional blast ammo, and also Arcane Hotshot, which is easily going to give us even more crit for the sniper. By the way we stack this up is with Diriga and Arc Coil. I've explored this synergy in another build, so I'm not going to go too deep into that. But if we have Diriga with Arc Coil and Diriga zaps enemies and inflicts heat, that actually stacks up our Arcane Hotshot. Then, as a subsume ability, we use Thermal Sunder to infuse even more blast damage on the weapon itself, because, why not? The more damage, the better. But this is not necessary. You can go for literally anything else you like, as we're going to get the blast itself from the resupply anyway. As for the Perigale build itself, this right here would be what we're working with in the case of Side09. To ensure that we get as much multi-shot as possible, we go for Galvanized Chamber in combination with Primary Overcharge. This is also the reason why I want to have like 900 or 1000 energy even, because this one gives you up to 350% more multi-shot based, on your maximum energy. If you, however, feel that this restricts you a little bit too much, or you have a Warframe that just doesn't have all that much energy, what you can do alternatively would be going for Primary Frostbite right here, giving you more crit damage and multi-shot, or alternatively Primary Blight, both kind of sort of do the same thing. You just gotta make sure to have a lot of multi-shot. However, one thing that you shouldn't do is Primary Crux. Yes, it's all nice and well to have status chance, but remember, we're force proccing the blast here with Side09, so our status chance really doesn't matter at all for this build. What does matter though is faction damage as well as Elementalist, because it is of course a damage over time build, so this is an absolute must. And this is also very, very cool, because we're using Side09, we can become constantly invisible, which will then allow us to use Spectral Serration over Normal Serration, which gives us double the damage as long as we're invisible. Just as a quick side note, in a lot of the gameplay scenes in the background, it looks like I'm actually not invisible, even though I am. And the reason for that is that I use the invisibility setting right here, the cloak appearance, which gives me the glow cloak. This will make it that you're actually not visually invisible, while in theory you actually are. Just wanted to mention that so that there is no confusion. And now, also check out my full Varuna Prime guide right here, who came together with the Perigale earlier this week. Another massive shoutout to Niels V, Demon Lord Cell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nost Linux Gaming, Turtle Pier, Ondakania 2, Scalabauza, Mihawki, Socrates the Almighty Rat, Leo Murazaki, Shadow Lockhart, Hantakas, Patrasader, Boomer1, Mr. Games Plays, Zave, Awendai, Zengen, Quax, Henrik5984, Blue Eagle 98, Hearthwield, Everin 8802, Gabriel Tevez, Yaco Ivan Gonzalez, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other hopefully in the next one, and until then, have a great weekend.